Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Project 10X Weekly Roundup, where we go through the most interesting crypto, finance and tech articles hitting the media in the last week. I'm 𝗙𝗏𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗏𝗀, and today I'll be discussing Tesla adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. That is huge news, and what that means for us moving forward. We're going to have insight from Michael Saylor and Cam the Man, Cameron Winklevoss, among others. So let's kick things off. Tesla purchases 1.5 billion in Bitcoin. They announced it, and they'd also start accepting the cryptocurrency as payment, according to an SEC filing. So they say they purchased the Bitcoin for more flexibility to further diversify and maximize returns on cash. And that is fair enough, because they're maximizing shareholder value and building their balance sheet. So if we take Tesla as an example, if they invest a portion of their assets into Bitcoin, a portion of their cash, 1.5 billion, and the price of Bitcoin doubles, they have now made an extra 1.5 billion in cash or liquid cash reserves or their treasury. Now, just think about how many cars or products or services they would have to sell to double their cash reserves on their balance sheet. It's a huge amount. And this isn't a hypothetical. MicroStrategy CEO, Michael Saylor, he added $430 million of cash, transferred it to Bitcoin. He then proceeded to borrow debt, an extra $500 or $600 million, proceeded to change that into Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin doubled. The valuation of his company doubled. Not only that, he started bringing in investments from, BlackRock and the like, these huge asset managers. BlackRock is a $7 trillion under assets, all because he added Bitcoin to the balance sheet. Now, the article goes on to say, it makes Tesla the first automaker to accept the cryptocurrency. Well, duh, Elon has proven himself to be a visionary, right? Let's see what the other automakers have to say about that. GM has no interest in following Tesla and investing in Bitcoin. Well, GM also got bailed out. The US government says it lost 11.2 billion on a GM bailout after the US government spent about 50 billion bailing out GM as a result of the company's 2009 bankruptcy. If we listen to GM and their financial advisors, we'd all be on the street without any food. So there's that news as well. Next, we've got a tweet from Documenting Bitcoin, and they go to say Tesla has made more money buying Bitcoin yesterday than they did all of last quarter selling cars. Let that sink in for a second. They made more money in one day buying Bitcoin than they did all of last quarter selling cars. Let's put that into perspective of someone who is an employee, they're working, you might be on $20, $30 an hour. You put your hard-earned savings into Bitcoin, you buy $20,000 worth of Bitcoin, that's your savings. The price of Bitcoin doubles, you have made $20,000. How many hours would you have had to work for that $20,000? It's amazing. Let that sink in for a minute. Okay, we've got Lyn Alden, who is one of my favorite macroeconomists. She's also heavily involved in the Bitcoin side of things. She understands Bitcoin, she understands Ethereum really well, and her perspectives are really well thought out. She goes on to say Oracle's chairman, Larry Ellison, who is also on Tesla's board of directors, really important. If I were to guess, I'd go ahead and agree with folks saying that Oracle is near the top of the list of the S&P 500 companies that might shift to a non-zero BTC position. It's a good point there. 5% of Oracle's cash is 1.9, and that should be B for billion. So I think she's actually being a little bit conservative here. The chairman, Larry Ellison, who sits on the board of directors, he's just seen Tesla put in 1.5 billion, which is 15% of their cash reserves. And overnight, it has produced the same effect as selling a whole quarter's worth of cars. So I think Oracle's chairman will put more like 15% of Oracle's cash into Bitcoin. And that is a huge inflow of institutional investment into Bitcoin. So what's that? $5.7 billion more added into Bitcoin. And Oracle's not the only one. We've got Cameron Winklevoss. He says, if you are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you want to be the next one in Bitcoin, not the 500th one. The race is on. I love that. And he's spot on. He says, in 5 years, every Fortune 500 company has Bitcoin on its balance sheet. Every major central bank has Bitcoin on its balance sheet, and every investor factors Bitcoin into portfolio construction. And let that also include retail investors as well. So I think he's actually onto something here, because right now it's a few companies. The companies that have CEOs that are visionaries, or CFOs, or the executive board that are visionaries. Down the line, when you're being outpaced by these companies that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which allows you to, have a greater competitive advantage, which allows you to buy other companies faster, because you just got this, you're building your balance sheet, it's growing faster and faster and more every day, even faster than at the pace that you can possibly be selling a product or service. It's going to be a no-brainer. Everyone's going to go, okay, well, I need to add this to my balance sheet. Bang on the money there, Cam. We've got Bill Miller's multi-billion-dollar hedge fund to add Bitcoin exposure via GBTC. That's the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. The Miller Trust has filed an amendment to its registration statement with the US SEC to be able to gain exposure to Bitcoin. So he's got a 2.25 billion in assets under management, and they're looking at investing in Bitcoin through the GBTC, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. Another one, and he's not the first hedge fund, let me tell you that. There's plenty of them that have done it. Will Apple be the next company to adopt Bitcoin after Tesla? So I like this quote from Torosso Investments portfolio manager, Dan Weisskopf. He said that crypto investments would also be a hedge against inflation. And this brings us back to the money printing. So if governments or central banks are printing 30% more money or 20% more money every year, the buying power of your dollar is getting, destroyed. So why not buy Bitcoin and hedge against this inflation, this secret inflation, or this hidden inflation that we don't see? So with a market cap of more than 2.2 trillion, Apple is the world's most valuable company and has roughly 200 billion cash on hand, hypothetically enough to buy 25% of all Bitcoin in circulation. So imagine them putting 10% of that 200 billion in. That's another 20 billion in Bitcoin. And again, it's a matter of time. How many phones would they need to sell in order to double their cash on hand? Let's say they put it all in, 200 billion cash on hand. After all this time of Apple existing and killing it in the market, they've got 200 billion cash on hand. Now they put 200 billion in Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin doubles, they've got 400 billion. How many phones would they have had to sell? Billions. How many computers, laptops? Beats by Dre, geez, lots. Then even more promising news, we've got Virginia-based bank is letting customers buy Bitcoin at the ATM. So now we've got these on-ramps coming on. So besides Visa, Mastercard, PayPal, Square, we've even got banks letting customers buy Bitcoin. Mastercard will let merchants accept payments in crypto this year. Again, the payment giant plans to support digital currency transaction directly on the network. The Twitter CFO was on the news today. Ned Siegel said the firm has been watching other companies to see what it can learn. So he goes on to say they've done a lot of upfront thinking to consider how we might pay employees should they be asked to be paid in Bitcoin, how they might pay a vendor if they ask to be paid in Bitcoin, and whether they need to have Bitcoin on our balance sheet. To me, they're not saying this without a proven plan. There's no way that the Teslas of the world are going to come out and say they're probably going to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet without them having not already done it. So in my opinion, I reckon the Twitter CFO has let out a bit of a hint that they've already added it to the balance sheet. Then you've got the Grayscale CEO, Michael Sonnenschein, who was on the media today saying momentum is not only continuing this year, but is actually accelerating. So we're seeing very sustained and growing demand from a lot of institutional players at the moment. And this supports the argument that now there's going to be an avalanche of people coming in. Now that Tesla's done it, now that a whole bunch of these hedge funds have done it, now that there's these Bitcoin trusts being opened up all over the place, there's ETFs being proposed, there's all these on-ramps, there's institutional players are coming in and saying, hey, we want a slice of the pie. We're not happy with 20 or 30% returns per year in the market. We want 100% in 2 months, like what's happened with Bitcoin in the last 2 months. So then you've got the CIO of Guggenheim, Scott Minerd, who updated his long-term Bitcoin target to $400,000 to $600,000. Now, I should just add here that now that the hedge funds or bankers have these on-ramps, they've put infrastructure in place to allow people to buy Bitcoin through them, or they've got infrastructure in place for these services. Now it's easy for him to say 400 to 600,000. However, if you remember, actually, I've got the article here. Guggenheim CIO expects Bitcoin to drop to 20,000. It was only a month ago, before they had purchased $500 million of Bitcoin, where the Guggenheim CIO was saying, we expect it to drop to $5,000 to $20,000. He's trying to shake the market, shake all these weak hands, as people often like to say it. And once the market's sort of depressed based on his news and other bearish sentiment, then they go in, which they did do, and buy $500 million worth of Bitcoin. And now look at him hyping it up. Yeah, 400 to 600. Why not a million, 10 million? Now that he's in a position where, or Guggenheim partners are in a position, now they're hyping it up. We also have Tesla's Bitcoin may not trigger a wave of corporate demand, says JP Morgan. That's interesting. It might not trigger a wave of corporate demand, but why? Because of price volatility. They're saying may put corporates off from emulating Tesla's decision to invest in the cryptocurrency. Price volatility. How about the destruction of the dollar that's happening when central banks print 30% more money? How about when they increase the money supply by 30%? Is that not price volatility? Just because the dollar stays $1 doesn't mean that there's no volatility, that it doesn't mean that they're not destroying our dollar. I think it's just a little bit ridiculous. Maybe JP Morgan aren't positioned well enough. And to top it all off, Berkshire Hathaway are the largest shareholders of Bank of New York Mellon. Now, what that means is Warren Buffett enters Bitcoin. It's the biggest news of the day. The biggest investor, the most popular and most well-known and the wealthiest investor in the world has officially entered Bitcoin. Jamison Lopp from Twitter says, so BNY Mellon said Thursday it will hold, transfer, and issue Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies on behalf of its asset management clients. This is amazing, and this is even further proof that the institutional investors are coming in with institutional investor number one, Berkshire Hathaway, coming in. So this is really exciting news. So to bring it all together, I think there's a common theme here. We've got companies that are adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets, and there's going to be a lot more of them coming. You've got companies that are trying to figure out how to provide these Bitcoin services, these on-ramps. So you've got Visa, Mastercard, PayPal, Square. They're creating this retail network effect. And what that is going to do is going to bring in billions of people into the space, and it's going to be as easy for them as buying a cup of coffee. And to top it all off, we've got the Oracle of Omaha, the richest investor and the most famous investor in the world, who's now technically a Bitcoin investor. So we see that there's institutional investment coming in. We see that there's retail investment coming in, and it is just going to flood the market with demand, and the price of Bitcoin is probably going to go up in the short to medium term. So that's all we have time for today, folks. If you enjoyed today's video, remember to like and subscribe and turn on your notifications. I'll see you next week.